Okay, hello. Hi, welcome.
Hello!
Um, Sunday will be trotting around as usual. This is Hot Girl Book Club, and today we are joined again by my good buddy, my pal Rachel from Let Me
I'm so
Library.
happy to be an honorary hot dog today.
A double hot dog at this point.
Oh yeah. This is a quite delayed hot dog live show.
I know.
um
I keep thinking like, oh, it'll be like the first Wednesday, and then I need like another week to finish the book, and then I need another week to like recover from COVID. So it was
well,
it was
here's
one of
what's funny
those.
is I have our first hot dog book club book right here that I still haven't finished. I'm still working on it.
Damn it,
But
Rachel. It's so
I
good. You have to finish it.
I totally will, and I actually like I got it from the library. Like, no more excuses. I'm reading it before it's due back. But I actually did read this one and finished it
Great.
30 minutes before the live show. So, what's up? I have
Good. So
two
it's
other
really
books to finish.
fresh on your mind then. That's
Oh,
excellent.
totally fresh. Yeah.
Perfect. Good, because I finished it like 2 weeks ago. So you're going to have to help fill
Oh
in
yeah.
some of the gaps
I
for me.
I will do my best. I will do my best. Certainly.
Who do we have? Elizabeth is here. Hello. Haven't read it, but wanted to stop by
Hello.
and say howdy.
Hot dog.
Hello.
Howdy.
Brooke's here. Hello. And Steph is here.
Hello. Haven't read
Haven't
in
read in days.
days.
That is a
Oh
whole
my
vibe.
god.
Yes.
This is the first book I finished this month. Period.
Wow. I'm
I think it's like,
honored.
yeah. I mean, and like not like I was reading really hard and I was in a slump or anything. I was obviously having a great time, but I was like, I gotta read this book, and it's really good. So it's not like it was hard to read either.
I know.
So
I
thank
felt
you for
like it
making
went
me pick it
really
up.
fast. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, even I read parts of it physically, parts of it by audio, and both ways that I'm used to consuming it, it still went by very quickly, I think.
Yeah, I
So
would agree. For like it's like a long book, but it didn't feel like it at all. I felt like I flew through it.
yeah, I mean, this is like just under 400 pages, including the acknowledgments.
Hmm.
Um, and like sometimes before I started reading it, I was like, this is like a 400 something plus page book. This is gonna take me like a full month. And I started reading this like 2 months ago, sort of. Well, I put it on my TBR 2 months ago. Did I start reading it then?
No, that's classic. That's
Wait,
classic.
wait for the Q&A. But yeah. So still went by fast, and I was really glad once I did pick it up. I was like, this is pretty addicting writing. Like, I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty good.
Yeah, I really liked that it was actually funny. Like so many like literary books like this claim to be funny, or it's like all of the blurbs talk about how funny it is. But I thought that this one was like actually funny, and that was really cool.
Yeah, I definitely really enjoyed this one. I feel like there are a lot of moments that are kind of like it's a mixture of like frustration and also like I know this is gonna come back around and
Hmm.
be something later, and also there's also like kind of a secret mystery sort of with the family drama going on at the same time. So I feel like this really had a mix of everything without losing itself, which is also pretty rare. That it could
Yeah,
combine like being humorous, being interesting, being like kind of a call to feminism without being like the I forget what you did in your tier ranking video, but you had something that was like the type of feminist that you like recommend to your auntie,
oh
but
yeah,
like you know,
your hip aunties. Yeah,
yeah,
this would be a great one for hip aunties. Totally.
yeah. Like I feel like it could easily be hip auntie, but also like it's also more than just hip auntie too.
Oh
Just
yeah,
based on like the time that takes place in and some of the other things, which I also find really interesting, were some of the complaints that I saw on Goodreads that people were like, it's too progressive for the time that it was, and nobody would really think this way. But um,
I
I
felt
don't know
like
if I
that was
agree with
kind of
that.
the point though, is that she's treated
Yeah,
like such an outsider for the way that she thinks, and no one else
yeah.
in the entire book is like, they see her as so progressive and so radical, and she's just like, why
She's
do
like,
you
I
think I'm
literally just
so
want to do
alien?
my job
Yeah, yeah,
and like get through the end of my day. It's the kind of thing that I still think to this day you can say the same things that she does in this book, and there will still be people who scoff at you.
hmm,
Um, but I think from those more narrow mindsets of where people belong based on their gender roles, they're also going to be the same people who, and I'm not trying to make this judgment based on the people on Goodreads by any means, but I still think people from that mindset will still feel the same way regardless of what time it takes place in, because if you're living out of that, um, worldview that people belong here and people should be doing X, Y, and Z based on, what they were born as, it's just sort of shitty, first of all. And second of all, you're not seeing, what this book is trying to do, I think. And that even if some parts of it are a bit outside of the realm of logic, like 630 knows the language of English very intimately, it's still a little bit easier to suspend your disbelief when it comes to things like that, because it's still a pretty compelling story.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I loved 630 in general. One, like I loved the way that they named him, and just like him being like a proper character in the book. I love so much.
Yeah.
Okay, getting a little bit ahead of myself. I feel like we should do ratings and like overall thoughts.
Sure.
And maybe a summary for the peanut gallery at home. I rated this 5 stars, very enthusiastically.
Yes, I spied on your Storygraph rating a little bit before the
I figured you would. I was like, I bet she tracks me down.
Yeah, I was looking on Goodreads and I was like, oh, she doesn't use that anymore. Storygraph is the place to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, on Goodreads, as you know, you can only give it full star rating, so I rounded this one up on there, but on Storygraph, I ended up with a 4.5, and I rounded up to a 5 on Goodreads. So
nice.
Yeah.
So we're both big fans. I didn't think it was too progressive. I think people forget how progressive a lot of people were back then. Yeah, and it just got bulldozed over because we didn't have the internet back then. So we just start relying on, historical accounts and things like that.
Yeah, and I think also those types of movements were crushed more often than they are today because of the people in the 60s that were able to make these types of strides. It was less common for people to be able to speak outwardly like this without being immediately, put down the way that we see all of the women in this book pretty much are put down in that way. And you don't get to feel empowered the way that you do in 2022 without the efforts of those women that came before us.
100%. Yes. I love 630.
Yes.
It's like so fun. I love how they, like everything about that dog.
Yeah, it's so great.
Forrest Gump? Forrest Hump.
Hump, not Hump. Wow, Gump.
Got it.
I was like, is this inappropriate? What are you talking about?
3.5. I thought it was so slow in the beginning, I almost stopped reading. That's fair. It did kind of ramp up a little bit. That didn't bother me as much, though. I've read a lot of very slow-paced books recently, so I think I was desensitized.
I feel like, in the very beginning with the whole Beaker thing, I was like, okay, a little bit of drama. And then I feel like as soon as we get into Calvin's perspective, I was like, okay, this is pretty juicy. I'm interested. And as we know, things kick off, from there and get spicier. So not even really like from a usual book rating perspective. I haven't talked about books in 3 weeks. Listen, it got good. It got real good.
Yeah, I get what you mean, Brooke, because I found myself wondering in like the first quarter of the book, we get like a chapter from Mad or like the present timeline, and then like 100 pages of like backstory timeline, and I kept being like, okay, when do we get back to like the TV show part?
Yeah.
But then suddenly, eventually, I just found myself engrossed, and I didn't really mind after that. But I did get a little bit of whiplash right at the beginning.
Yeah, I think I came back to that at some point. Like, wait, when is she gonna be on the show? Like,
yeah, wait, what's happening? Wait, what is this about? Yeah. We also have another 5 stars from Paige.
Yay!
So good. Making a lunchbox for my mom, and it feels surreal given the book you're discussing. Another 5-star read. Love it. Yes.
That's amazing. Huh.
That was so good. I'm glad that we all mostly enjoyed it from what I'm hearing. Yeah. How do we feel about like Elizabeth as a character, like broad strokes? Did we like her? Did we were we annoyed by her? What was the vibe?
I liked her from the beginning. I really like characters who make a big stink and are just unapologetically like. I mean, not even it's so progressive to the point that it's something unrecognizable in 2022 as a brand new idea. So um it's not like wow this is blowing my mind, but it's also not really something I would call like baby feminism because in the 60s it was just the progressive type of feminism. But
Right.
it's the sort of thing that I'm always drawn to when somebody is kind of an unlikable from the perspective of the other characters, that type of personality, and they stand out. And generally, people are like, "Wow, this person sucks, and I hate them so much." And it's like, "Well, why? What's this person's deal? Like, why are they so why are they so hated, but also kind of maybe like respected in some other way?"
Mm-hmm.
So seeing her like as this person who barged in and ended up with a TV show is like, all right, that's kind of interesting. And seeing that she's not what people expect, she doesn't smile on TV. She just by the book delivers like this recipe calls for sodium chloride, and you're gonna add this amount of this, cook it at this degree, and obviously you do this because when you break down the chemical compounds, you're trying to give your body more energy. And like, here's all these scientific explanations. And so they're the things that you'd be like, well, who's going to buy into this thing? But people are drawn to that energy and they have that rapt attention as we see in the story. And I feel like that's the same way that I felt just starting off. I mean, I certainly had my doubts to begin with like, are we really going to get super technical with all the science throughout the whole, uh,
Mm-hmm.
explanation of this food? And like, is she going to be kind of like baby feminism type of feminism, but also it's the 60s, so like, I don't know. But
Right.
I feel like it was really well balanced. So, I mean, parts of it, again, were kind of like a suspension of logic of like, are we sure that all the women watching this show are like taking notes on all of the compounds and stuff that she's writing down? I don't know, but I'm willing
Mm-hmm.
to believe it because it's a great story. Like I like that, and
Right. Yeah.
that balance, all of that coming from her being that force, for just not even like I'm here for justice. It's like I'm just trying to live my life. Like I'm just trying to be the same person that anybody else would if they were born as a man in this society. So I see no reason why I can't do it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's great. I mean, I kind of I mean, like, I think a lot of women have like the realization of like, oh my God, gender roles exist, and I've
Right.
been pigeonholed into this one. Oh God, I don't like that. And I think when I was younger, I didn't really recognize gender roles as well because I would just try to like every time they were like, oh, can the boys move the chairs? They'd be like, I can do it, and I'd like
Right.
pick something up and just like it was really annoying. Um, and I don't even think I knew at all what feminism was, but I was just like, well, there's no reason that you can do it and I can't do it. All right,
Yeah.
fight me. Like,
Yeah. I can do
like,
it. Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I definitely antagonized a few people, but certainly not with the type of consequences that Elizabeth Zott had. But it's something that I've always just kind of been like, yeah. I mean, like, why can't you do something like that? And again, I don't think that would be an idea I ever had in my childhood without the real life women who did things like that. So it's something I definitely appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, like what you said about are all of the women really taking notes at home? Probably not. But and I wondered about that too of like, well, would they actually be so obsessed with the show? And there's that moment where a journalist is like interviewing some of the fans and like the live audience, and he asks someone like, "Why do you like this show so much? Like, why do you connect so much with Elizabeth?" And like he kind of says it in like a condescending manner, I guess, and the woman just like has her notebook out and goes, because she takes us seriously or something along those lines, where it's not like pandering, and it's not there's not like homey decor, and she's not wearing a dress. It's like this is what you need to nourish your family, no bullshit about it, and I could
Oh,
totally
the
see
one that was like, here's how you poison anybody
yeah.
who like pisses you off. Just kidding. But here's what mushroom looks exactly like this other poisonous mushroom. Where I was like, girl boss, like, come on, come on.
I love that.
Uh,
I love that. And then the little aside
yeah.
that was like, across America, no one touched their dinner that night. I
Oh yeah.
made me laugh.
It's so great. Oh
I started reading the physical book, and then it wasn't going to finish before the first, so I grabbed the audio. 1,000% recommend the audio. That's really good to know. Love a
yeah, I
strong
definitely
audiobook.
enjoyed.
Liked her a lot. I liked how she supported other women throughout the book. Yes, that's really true, because I think she even explicitly says at some point, like, she knows how she's been treated and how people make all kinds of assumptions about her, that she goes out of her way, to not try and make assumptions for other women. Like, she has that moment with, what's her name? The woman at the firm that, like, gossiped about her.
Oh,
And
Frask? Or is it Frisk? Frisch? Mm, near the end.
yes. But they have this moment
Okay.
in the bathroom where they're like screaming at each other and then realize they have similar trauma, and they're like, what are we doing? Why are we doing this?
Yeah, I think her name's Frask. I'm pretty sure. It's definitely something
I
starts
think
with
you're
an F.
right. Frask something.
I think something like that. But yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think it's also interesting because a lot of the men do what we've seen men do throughout history, where they try to pit women against each other.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes women try to pit themselves against each other. So we saw there was it wasn't the same woman, I don't think, but there was it the same woman? Was it Frask who was dating Eddie? And
Yeah.
so when she went into the lunchroom, she'd be like, "Oh, I've heard this thing about them," and she would try to like spread rumors to kind of disparage. Yeah, I think that was her. So she was
Yeah.
trying to spread rumors to disparage her. And then, of course, in other times when she was running the show, they were like, "Oh, it's just like run it for like plain Janes at home, like
Right.
the average housewife." And she's like, "There's no such thing as the average woman, the average housewife,
Yeah.
because." Oh, you're at home just raising the kids and you think that that's
Mm-hmm.
so easy. And, every time that she refused to, make it a competition between herself and some other woman, I mean, like, I definitely had more respect for her for that, because that's a part of, I think, like, the feminist journey in general, but it's a part of maturity to not try to get a leg up on your competition by putting somebody else down in a world where women are expected to compete for half of a single seat in a house full of men. Like
Right.
it's always something that is, unspoken as an implicit rule of how to get ahead, is to just beat the other woman in the room so that you're the best one. And meanwhile, she's more interested in uplifting people. And every time that she said, well, somebody called for a magazine interview or whatever, she was like, I don't care. I'm not interested in anything like that. But when it was like, hey, these women are all doing amazing things, including you, or here are the women that were inspired because of you, those
Mm-hmm.
were the things that she was actually interested in, because it was the impact that women have in a society when they're actually taken seriously.
Yes. I love when she started taking audience questions. Like, the first time it happens, she's like, "Oh, we have some extra time. Let's take an audience question." And
I
her
loved
best friend, the
that.
director, is like, "No, no."
Yeah, she's
And
like, don't
she
do that.
ends
No,
up
no,
taking
no.
this, like, there's this woman who basically admits that she, like, wants to be like a
An
surgeon or
open
something.
heart surgeon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and like says it on the show, and Elizabeth, everyone around is kind of like nervous and giggly, like, oh, like, what an outrageous thing for like a woman to admit on like television that she wants to do. And Elizabeth is like, well, what, like, do it. Like, well, what would my husband think? He should be very proud. Next question. It was like,
And it's like, oh,
I love
it's
that
like, I have
moment.
5 sons and like whatever. And then she like looked in the camera and was like, boys, set the
Yes,
table. Your mother needs a moment for herself. Like, girl
so
boss,
good.
come
I
on.
love that.
And then at the end, where it was like she passed all of her exams and she just like had an accelerated thing through school, and then she's going to med school.
Yeah,
And
that was such
like,
a sweet callback. Like, I didn't even expect to get that callback, but I was so glad that we did. That was like the
yeah,
cherry on top.
oh, it was so great. I love that.
Where, let's see. I think this was about Frask. It was the same
Oh
woman at the
yes, it was the same woman. Yeah.
firm. Let's see. As far as her being in chemistry, which I think was like the perfect field for her as a character, it really felt like, I don't know. I didn't feel like she was written as a chemist. I felt like she was written as a woman who found
Sorry,
chemistry was
hold
like
on.
this
I think
field for me.
Sasha's trying to like break down my door because I like half close it, and every so often I just hear like a bam, like she's just like throwing herself against the door. I'm gonna open the door real quick. I'll be right back.
Yeah,
Please
she
keep
needs to
talking.
be part of this. Let her in the building.
Let her in my room. Let
Let,
her in my
your
library.
honor. Let her in.
And he comes out the
Sasha!
inside.
I also love
Sasha,
that your picture is
hello.
still Mike Wazowski.
Oh, always.
Pretty legendary. Mine might be too, actually.
Is it?
No.
Oh. Oh wait, no, yours is that thing. You
It's
always
still
change it
Homer
too.
Simpson. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, perfect.
But where's my little
Yes,
discussion
Sasha's
question
been
go?
very needy ever since we've been gone for like 2 weeks.
I know. She's like,
So
human, give me attention.
she's like, oh, thank God you came back.
Okay, so as far as like Elizabeth being in chemistry, which I felt like it just made sense, you know.
Yeah.
But in the
Well, I also thought
60s,
that was really interesting because from like, admittedly, like from the cover and from the premise of like, there's a woman in chemistry who ends up with the show and she's like very no nonsense or whatever. I was expecting like a romance love story because I was
mhm,
like, oh, lessons in chemistry, chemistry, lessons in chemistry, romance. Obviously, there's no other explanation for what this would possibly be. Like, if you don't read what it's really about, and you're just like, oh, okay, like there's this woman, and then there's one guy, Calvin Evans, the lonely, brilliant Nobel Prize nominated grudge holder. You're just like, oh, two science people. This is like the love hypothesis, right?
mhm.
No, no, it is not like the love hypothesis.
I know. I
um,
think it's meant to trick you, though. I think it's supposed to
yeah,
be like a gotcha.
yeah, a little bit because I think it fits so well because I mean like if you read it through you can easily get like a misconception about what it's supposed to be, um, and it's such an interesting choice because I think publishing sometimes drops the ball and they give you like the wrong tone in a bad way, but this one worked for me because I think
Mhm.
from the cover where it's like okay I expect a romance but not like ooey gooey, like super fun, smutty time or anything like that. Just like a story of people in love or something like that. It's intriguing enough. It still pulls you in. It still kind of delivers on that love story while being extremely unorthodox in the love story by itself for not giving you what you expect out of your traditional heteronormative romance story of like there's two people, they like each other, they start dating, they decide to get married once they fall in love, and then they're going to have a baby and then they're going to live in a house. Like it's totally not what you expect from that, and that's also not what the story is about.
Mhm.
But it's also still kind of a love story at the end of the day in some strange way because Elizabeth and Calvin meant so much to each other that even as the story progresses and it's no longer really about the two of them, Calvin is always still somewhere in the back of her mind. It's still like an impact of their relationship together, and it's not like a story that's just like all men are evil, villainizing all men, but it's still an explanation of one woman striving throughout an entire life experience of everyone constantly putting her down and finding one source of light and realizing that is the best thing that ever happened to her and she's so happy and um I mean so many terrible things continuing to happen to her while other somewhat positive things happen in a back and forth type of way and holding on to this kind of tragic love at the same time and sort of finding this light at the end of the tunnel that doesn't revolve around a man the way that so often we could see a story in the 60s pan out where it's like I accomplished all these things but at the end of the day I got the guy so hooray. It's not really
Mhm.
even like a direct foil to that but I think it's done well while balancing that concept without really shoving it in your face either. So I think it
Yeah.
was a really interesting choice from Bonnie Garmus's perspective to accomplish that without making it overly patently obvious because I think she also kind of trusts her audience to recognize what's happening there without, saying it in plain English. She doesn't have to.
Definitely. This is interesting because I agree with both of these. I did not like Calvin personally, and I loved her and Calvin together. Because I wasn't crazy about him, but I liked the relationship that they had. And I think as far as like I didn't like him, but he like respected and listened to Elizabeth as her own person and not as like a possession or a wife or whatever. It was like he saw her as an equal and a peer and a fellow chemist and researcher, and that's what I really appreciated about their relationship. But him as a person, I was kind of like, meh. Which also, like, I found weirdly refreshing, because so often there's these very like blank, empty, overly perfect
Mm.
male characters in like literary books slash romances like
You know what
this,
I
where I'm
loved
like,
about
wow, he's
Calvin
so
was that
flawed.
what I loved about Calvin, which is exactly the same vein of what you're saying, is that he was not a rich guy that solved all her problems. Because so many times I'll be like, wow, this is a great book. I love this. And at the end, the love interest, it was secretly rich all along. And then they solve all of the protagonist's problems so that nobody ever has to use their brain ever again. And it's just like, don't worry, my money will fix everything. And now we live happily ever after. And that's the end. I was just like, okay, if this is what that ends up being, it's very hard for me to enjoy the story of like a romance between any two characters just in general. But, you know, in a story like this where it's about, you know, taking options where you're always going to be paid like way less than your coworkers because you just don't have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And you're still pursuing the work regardless. And then you unexpectedly find love in a scenario where most of the other people that you meet here are terrible, and you find one person who's good, and they are also deeply flawed and not um like, I mean, they're kind of respected in a way that they're famous, but people don't love them either. So you're both sort of these outcasts here, and to have them find each other, I really liked. I wouldn't say like I love Calvin or I hated Calvin in either way. I definitely think that he had a lot of his flaws on the page for you to read about, and it was harder to look past them in some of the ways that he did respect Elizabeth the way no one else did, but he also was still very set on ideas of like, we're going to get married because that's what we should do, and like I can convince her for sure that we can
Mm-hmm.
definitely get married, and like I think she should row because it would be really fun that we could row together. And she's like, I don't want to, and he's like, what, you think a woman can't do it? She's like, fine,
Right.
fine, maybe I will do it. And like he knew how to like kind of play her in that way, which I don't even think is necessarily like a flaw of his, but I think it was kind of funny.
It was, I
But
did like that moment, but it was
it's like a
vaguely
little bit,
manipulative, but I wasn't
yeah,
really mad about it,
exactly.
you know?
Yeah, where it's like a little bit pushy. A little bit, Brooke totally called me out there. It's all good dice dreaming. That
Yeah.
was that
Well,
was
yeah,
the
All Good Ice Cream was the classic, like, it'll be okay because there's money, which,
yeah.
yeah, that's like the classic. I'm gonna have to go read that.
It's mostly just screaming about like this was great until the end it was extremely wasteful. Like every time someone just wastes a bunch of money or is just like, I was secretly rich. It's like
Yeah, I
minus
get what you
one star. Minus one star. I can't do this.
mean.
No.
That was pretty much how I think we felt a few months ago when I read that with Cammy and Naomi. We all kind of felt like, okay, like what was that ending? I don't know.
Yeah. Oh,
um, I just lost my train of thought. Speaking of Calvin and wanting to get married, he's like constantly trying to talk about it and does actually propose. And she tells him no. Why do we think that she was like so adamant about not getting married?
I mean, I think that she loved Calvin, but she was never buying into that housewife mentality of like, my whole life I've dreamed of being a wife. My whole life I've dreamed of being a person who like does whatever she does until she meets her husband and goes home, and then I get to raise the kids and make the food and whatever. And like that was never her vision at all of what her life
Mm-hmm.
would be. And also, I also liked, just, you know, slightly off topic, that she also never had said like it's bad to be that way, but she was like,
Mm-hmm.
well, some women want to be housewives. I don't. So here's what I want to do. And she never disparaged that either, which also
Yeah.
comes into, you know, separate six later on. But I think she never pictured that. So the idea of like, I'm going to get married to somebody, and then in this world, that means give up your job. All of my work is now under the name of Elizabeth Evans. So if it's Dr. Evans or, you know, something Evans, it's Calvin Evans's work. So everybody will think that I didn't do any research and I only got this because you're famous and I'm
Mhm.
dating you and now I'm married to you and now that's how I got where I am today. So no more respect in the very small amount of smidgen of respect in this field that I already have. And then also I have to give up my name. Why do I have to do that? And they were like, well, that's not necessary to do things. And she's like, okay, so you want to give up your name? And he's like, well, why would I do that? And it's like, well, then you could be Calvin Zott. What do you think? Sounds pretty good, right? And then everything that you publish could be like by C Zott, which is like me. And it's like, no, why would I ever do that? It's like, yeah, I mean, so now it sounds ridiculous. So why should I have to do that? If you respect me as an equal, then I don't want to do that. Um, and I think she had a very logical way of thinking through those things that to other people of the time seemed deeply irrational. And I think even today, people still maintain that sort of, I don't know if it's like ties back to, oppression of women through patriarchy or some other, social customs. But generally, women who don't get married, especially at younger ages or older ages, if you are younger, at a younger age, it's more expected, like, when are you going to get married? And for men, even if you're much older, it's like, oh, well, he's still figuring it out and you can still get somebody. It's fine. But once you get older and older as a woman, then it's like, oh, you better hurry up. Your prospects are drying up. You're never going to get married. So you just don't want to get married? What are you going to do? Where it's like, I'm going to live my life. Like there's nothing that says I have to get married to be fulfilled, but it's so deeply ingrained in the gender role that it's expected that you hit a certain age and after that it's like, okay, you have obviously something wrong with you because people don't want to marry you, not that you don't want to. And if you don't want to, then there's definitely something wrong with you. And there's all of these myths that are surrounding women are constantly adding more and more pressure that still exist today. And I'm sure, were also pressures in this book that Elizabeth is just the more strong-headed type of person to be able to stand up against without fear of what people will think, because she's never allowed anyone to get close enough to her to make a judgment on her that would matter if it doesn't, emotionally, like if it doesn't impact her work, the judgments that other people make, she just has to have them brush off her shoulders because she just could not possibly let herself be stopped by the bombardment of different things that people think of her, because then she would never move.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you said it would be about them, like the perception of them being fulfilled or not, because I feel like in this time, and even still persists today, of like, what, you don't want to be married, or aren't you getting old, whatever. I think I would argue that it's less about people being concerned about the woman being fulfilled rather than their potential partners. Like, oh, but you would make such a good wife for someone. Like, forget
Mm.
about what the woman wants for her
Oh, and it's
own.
always like, don't you want to be a mother? So it's like the preclusion of marriage before motherhood, which
Right. Like,
also plays
oh,
into
yeah,
this
don't you want to be
too.
a mother? Like you would make such a good wife, you'd make such a good mother. Like
I mean,
men love a younger woman, like whatever. All of those
yeah, and
things.
I mean,
Yeah.
also the fact that like that's just put onto. I mean, like, so oftentimes people think that there's just generally like something wrong with a couple if they are married and don't have children too.
Hmm.
So it's like, oh, you can't conceive. Where it's like, first of all, that's none of your business at
Right.
all. Second of all, don't expect people to just randomly start popping kids out just because they're married. All right, like calm down.
Hmm.
Thirdly, like, you don't need to be married to have children, obviously, but it's so weird that as a society we were like, all right, let's have people get married, and then immediately it's like, so when are the kids coming? Where it's like, let people live their lives,
And I
decide if they want to
agree.
have kids,
Yeah.
but also like don't force people who shouldn't be parents to be parents, because there's plenty of people out in the world who make adult decisions of getting married and also make adult decisions that they shouldn't do, having children and then being responsible for them. And, you know, not to get this totally off topic, but it's a whole big thing that people expect of you. And it's so weird how many times like I have been told constantly, like also by my own family, of like, oh, so like don't you, like, when you're a mother one day, then you'll do
Mm-hmm.
blah blah blah. And I'm like, well, what if I don't want to be a mother one day? Or like, that's it's kind of weird that you just
Making some
assume this
assumptions here. Yeah.
on anybody. But like, those are comments I've been hearing for like the last like 15 years. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
well, 15 years ago I was like, what, 11? So who was telling me like one day when you're a mother where it's like, I'm 11, I'm 11. No, it's never gonna happen. No, disgusting. Stop. Like, gross. But it's I don't know. I mean, people don't make those assumptions in the same respect, even though they will when people are married. There's like an expectation, which is still heavily placed on the woman, of like, when are you going to be a father? Like, or are you excited about whatever? But it's generally still like the woman is responsible for, carrying the baby, conceiving the baby, and like if anything goes wrong, it's her fault. And also now, once it pops out, it's her responsibility to raise the child, take care of them completely up until adulthood, and continue to care for this person, plus the whole family, plus feed everyone, plus clean every. Like, it's, I don't want to, pop a gasket over here, but I mean, like, come on, relax. I'm
I
busy. I have
know.
other
Are
things to
you
do.
okay, Rachel? But
No.
even it's so true though, because even in with our hero Elizabeth, where he does propose and she says no, and then she does have Mad, and spoiler disclaimer, Calvin dies. And like, so even though everyone knew that they were together, everyone knew that he proposed, everyone knew that obviously he died, she was pregnant, had his baby, but she still is completely shunned for quote unquote having a baby out of wedlock. And it's like, she's grieving, she's a single brand new mother with a newborn who is like alone in their house doing all of this all
Who
on
was
her own and is
fired
forced to
from
quit
her
her
place?
job. Yeah,
Yeah.
is like threatened. Yeah, absolute chaos.
I mean, in terms of like the trauma Olympics, like Elizabeth Zott is definitely real high up there.
Oh yeah, she's
And
she's
just,
going for gold.
oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh, you're so right. What was it?
Um, hmm.
Oh, it's gonna come to me. There was, yeah.
I have to think about this one. I'm trying to remember this.
I'm just
What the
gonna
mom
magically
said
flip
about
to the page.
her and marriage.
Oh,
Do you remember what it was, Brooke? Because I don't remember. I'm getting married to, not to like totally rag on marriage and be like, congratulations. Like,
well, that's what
uh,
we're saying, right? It's like I, for the people that are excited about it, I am excited for them about it. Like it's
yeah,
not, there is no like, oh, I'm better than anyone or anything. I think that's what Elizabeth was trying to get at, is like, look, everyone's choices are valid whether they fit into the socially accepted things to do or otherwise.
right.
My partner might change his last name, but I'm not changing mine. Good for you. I'm not
Exactly.
changing
Thank
mine
you.
either.
Be the change you wish to see in this world.
No one ever asks men if they want to be fathers. Women are prepared their entire lives.
Well,
Exactly.
that's the thing. Like, no one asks women if they want to be mothers, they expect them to be. So
Well,
if
right.
you're
It's
not a mother, then it's like, there's some, it's not even like, oh, why not, let me think about it realistically, but it's always like, okay, let me give you 10 reasons why you do want to be a mother. You'll change your mind. You want to raise a child. Your eggs are going to dry out by 30. You have to, like it's just like,
right.
hit you with a million things, and you're like, I didn't ask.
Mm-hmm.
No thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I still haven't changed my mind. You've actually made up my mind more. Thank you. Like, no.
Right. Well, it's also like no one ever asks men how they balance family life and working. That's
Yeah.
only women get that question, you
Oh
know?
yeah, all the time. I think that was also kind of early on in the book at some point. I'm trying to remember exactly when that was. I don't know if it was with Walter or not, but I feel like somebody had said like, "Oh, why are you here? Isn't, like, it's the middle of the day? Shouldn't you be at home like prepping dinner or something like that?" And she's like, "Well, I'm working. Aren't you working? So why aren't you at home taking care of your children?
Oh, you're
Why would
right.
I do
Yeah.
that or whatever?" And it's like, well, you have a kid, right? So like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard not to respect it. Like, what she does. It's pretty great.
Oh, it's so gutsy every time. I'm like can't help but like cheer for her. Um it reminds me. Okay, so Calvin was one man that would say things, and then Elizabeth would like lecture him on like, hey, you only think that because of the patriarchy, and let me tell you why you were wrong about it and how you should be reframing those thoughts. And then
Right.
is his name Walter, her friend that she makes at the network?
Yeah, I
Or
think Walter was the like he's the producer of the show that, spoiler alert, eventually takes over for the whole station after
right.
that idiot guy has a heart attack because he fucking pulls out like a knife when he's trying to assault her and she's just like oh my
Yeah,
god.
which also that was such a good scene. But Calvin and Walter, I think, were two really great examples of men in that time period who coasted on their privilege and the just normal
Oh yeah.
thoughts and assumptions that society had just bred into them until that they had never questioned until meeting Elizabeth, and Elizabeth being like,
Yeah.
why do you think that? That's really messed up. Why would you make those assumptions about me? And both of them would be like, oh my god, you're so right. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna go think about this and I'm gonna unpack this. And those two men were seen as like the good guys because they were simply willing to like look differently
Change
at
the
their own like
perspective.
thoughts and assumptions, and that was the bar.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I mean, like, they were good guys for not assaulting any of the characters,
Right.
not being, like, openly disparaging and being like, oh my god, like, let me find every insult under the sun for a woman and use it in one sentence.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't, like, put anybody down for the things that they could do without, like, reflecting on what they were actually thinking at that time. And also their thoughts about women were not disgusting the way that like other people were. And literally the bar is that low. But I also kind of appreciated the fact that the men were not like in so many romance books like these saints straight out of like their feminist 101 class, because it doesn't really make sense for men to come in here and just, oh, excuse me, my alarm. It doesn't make sense for like men to just pop into the story and be like, I think women should be allowed to do anything, because it doesn't make sense for people who have been living with this privilege their whole life to have ever thought differently before without being challenged. So it's
Mm-hmm.
more, the respect that I would have for a character that gets challenged. And so often, I mean, like, also the bad men that are bad men in the story are challenged and they don't respond well. So I respect, at least for the time period, that these were people who heard something completely different from their worldview, questioned it, interacted with the challenge, and then came away from it feeling differently, given that there weren't really like other resources for them to look at and be like, is this patently true or not? But they actually just believed the woman right in front of them who said, this is true for women. I'm a woman. I'm speaking for my experience and the experience of many, many, many other women that I know. This is true. And it just changes, like it's a epiphany moment. And if it can change your mind in a world where most of the time you're in a boys club of everyone just being like, let's talk about women's boobs and stuff all day long, it's like, no. um, it's not like something really to be applauded, but it's also something that I can respect, that the characters actually changed their minds, knowing that it was so much easier to slip back into the privilege. But Elizabeth Zott was the type of person that I think drew people to her, and it was harder to disagree with her if you were not like the sleazy, gross guy that's just trying to steal her work or sleep with her
Mm-hmm.
or whatever it is. Um, but I think those distinctions were definitely made like very much on purpose for the reader to show that there are kind of like the shades of gray, and that there's not going to be like the perfect guy who understands everything or like the worst possible evil monster in every single sense, because even the characters that are really bad are the people who are growing up with the perspective that they rule the world
Mm-hmm.
and that they should be doing the things that they're doing, and why not. And that's exactly what she actually says in the interview. um, that the, I forget his name, it starts with a D, but it's the guy who ran the program who um, you know kept taking all the money for the Abo Giant.
Oh, her boss. Yeah, her boss at
And
that one place.
yeah, I'm trying to remember his name. It was like D Denis
It
D
started with a
Donati
D.
Donati, I
Donati.
think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, spoiler alert: Donati steals all of Zot's research, and then lies to the investors, saying that Zot is not only a man, but also he wasn't very good at his research at abiogenesis, but Donati was, and here's all of his findings, and he uses all these big words, and he's like, well, I'll just wait for Elizabeth to come back, and then when she calms down from yelling at me, I'll have her explain what these words are so I can explain them to
Mm-hmm.
the investor. And she's just like, cool, I quit. Like, I'm done. And he's like, oh, there's no Google. No Google. What am I going to do? Don't know what a library is. I have no idea what
Right.
to do. But, I mean, like, he's such a despicable character. And for obvious reasons, we're supposed to hate him. But so often he's just like, not listening to anything anyone says. And he's like, oh, I need a drink. And like, I don't want to be here, and she's so stupid and whatever. And you almost feel bad that that's the only perspective that he has, because he's never he's never been challenged by a thought that changed his mind before. And
Right.
when you live in such a small, narrow-minded point of view, like, you're a bad person, yes, in this story, but I also just kind of feel bad for you because you'll never experience life the way other people do when they're challenged and they respectfully, agree or disagree and come away from it differently. But he has been the same person over the course of the entire story of many, many years that's taking place, and he never changes. He's always horrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, all of the men that she comes into contact with, and some of the women too, just have never had their perspectives challenged before until Elizabeth explicitly is like, why do you think that? And
Yeah.
forces them to sit with it. And that's the line that's drawn, is the people that are willing to be like, oh, huh, you're right. That's the and versus the other people that are like, no, I will hold on to my beliefs. Don't you challenge me. And then like those are the villains of the story. I thought was a really interesting way to kind of paint that difference.
Yeah.
Just how much more I know about children than my partner is crazy just from being a woman. Yeah, 100%. My dad was a stay-at-home dad and my mom a chemist, so I have great examples in my life. Oh my
Oh,
gosh, that's
wow.
amazing.
That's a perfect book for you because it was only 6.5. But
Madeline, is that you? Or Mad, I should say.
yeah.
Just hopped in, but when Calvin was like, why wouldn't we want women in science? We need more scientists. And Elizabeth is like, dude, sexism.
And Calvin was like,
Exactly. Yeah. Which was like
because
kind of
she
wholesome
just
and
like,
precious, but also like so privileged.
it's so funny because she just looks at him and he's like, what? And it's like,
Yeah.
you're not hot enough to be a himbo, but understand you're so stupid right now. Like, please.
Yeah. Well, he
And
said something like, do you really think that like women would be interested? And she's like, yeah. Oh,
yeah,
well, why aren't they in university classes? And she's like, say it
because
slower.
like, let me say it again, louder for
Yeah.
the brain cells in the back, please.
Love the framing of this book as Elizabeth just forcing people to confront sexism and seeing how they evolve or not as characters. I love the rowing coach and Gyno too for his brand of acceptance. Yes. Oh, another great character. And
Yeah.
so was Calvin's pen pal that like Mad becomes friends
Oh, I
with.
really liked him
That
too.
was
Yeah, the
another great
bishop.
character that also is kind
Was
of
it,
like, I need to rethink about some
or
things.
not bishop? He was like the preacher. Because the
Yeah.
bishop was the guy at the boys' home who was like, "Oh, Calvin died from pneumonia." Or it's like, it's
That's
the
so bad.
patent lie. Like, literally, you're lying right now. And okay, also the fact that, I mean, first of all, Elizabeth is such a like beyond, like, above and beyond type of person. Like, the bishop was like, "Oh, here's a fake death certificate that I forged for this super legit founder." So I don't know where a bishop is gonna get the skills to do that. And Elizabeth Zott was like, "I have analyzed the type of ink that goes into this paper, so I'm gonna forge your birth certificate so you can go to school early." Like, what? Oh my god. It was just,
Yeah, oh my god, I forgot that she sent Mad to school early. Which also, we haven't even talked about Mad, but just the fact that she's like a 5-year old the entire book and is treated like an intelligent, independent entity in her own right was so cool and refreshing. And like the complex emotions and thoughts and opinions that she expresses that are taken
yeah.
seriously. I thought was such a cool dynamic between her and her mom, and with their dog, and with like the other people in the story. Their neighbor Harriet was like also cool to see, like a child actually having her own like independent, intelligent thoughts.
Yeah, and I think also like I mean, she was still definitely a child in terms of like don't answer the door without me, but she was still not like the super obedient kid of like, oh, sure, whatever you say because you're an adult. But it was like, well, I'm curious and there's kind of a mystery for me to solve, so I'm going to investigate this further and do like podcast level investigative journalism myself to figure out where the heck my dad came from. And I'm going to put this into my own hands and cause
Yeah.
this whole end of the book to happen the way that it does.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I mean, like she's a great character, just in general, to come out of this situation and just be still very matter of fact and not necessarily grounded in like I'm going to do whatever I can because of the oppression of women in the world, but it's more just like a most logical point of view of like, well, I would like to work with the same toys that the boys are using. And then they get a note home that's like, well, she refuses to play with the dolls like the other girls, and she keeps wanting to work with this type of stuff. And it's like, well, why don't you just let her use that type of stuff? And it's like, well, this is obviously really inappropriate that she isn't playing with the baby dolls like all the other girls that are 5 years old. Where it's like, all right, cool. So keep ingraining this into my child at this stage, where it's like, well, why don't you ask her what she wants to do? Because she isn't a full grown adult, but she basically has more of a brain than most of the full grown adults in this book that are constantly perpetuating these stupid ideas. So, sometimes, and it's not even like because she's such a smart kid, but sometimes if you just ask a kid, like, what do you want to do without
Mm-hmm.
forcing them into um, your preconceived notion of what they need to be and not, obviously forcing a gender role, hopefully, but kids often do know what they want and allowing them to have the options is one of the fastest ways to expand their minds because the things that we force kids to be, like, hey, go play with dolls, go play with this kitchen, you play with these dolls, and the boys get to play with trucks and they get to go out in the mud and they splash around it, but it's not ladylike for you to get messy or anything like that. Like, even those tiny things that you could try to say I can unlearn later are so deeply ingrained in your own impression of yourself and who you become. And, I think Elizabeth Zott just said, like, I'm having a child and I'm going to do as much as I can to give her everything without smothering her, without treating her like she's less than just because I'm older than her. And she just treated her with so much more respect than I feel like anybody even ever afforded her. She just
Yeah.
said, I'm going to give my child the most respect I can. I'm still going to shield her from things that I think are bad, but not because I think like she's too young to handle it, but because I just know that they're bad. Like, I don't want her to have to live the life of like this horrible celebrity life of people making up rumors about you and finding out like you're a child made out of wedlock and stuff. And it's like, well, yeah, but I don't want her to feel badly about it, so I'm not going to tell her. But I also like that that never really turned into a whole point of conflict of like, oh, how could you never tell me? And like, I was trying to protect you, and you don't think I'm mature enough. But like, none of those things happened because, whether realistically or not, I mean, Mad was just very, you know, well rounded enough to know what she wanted, and she, chased after it. She was smart enough to say, why should it be this way? And then followed that feeling, um, and, interacted with people that seemed to be folks that she probably never would have if she was ever raised differently. Like, she talked with the priest
Mm-hmm.
um, to get information. She talked with the librarian constantly of like, I need this particular book, and they're like, why is she reading all these like super advanced books that we obviously don't have? And it's like, well, I need to go and find, children's orphanage that's in a town in Iowa. It sounds like a girl's name. All right, so let's look through all of these, documentation and everything like that. Like, she's doing so much stuff that I would never even expect like a teenager to be able to do as effectively as her. But with the optimism of a child, I feel like you don't yet get dampened down by the world of like, you're not allowed to do this, you can't do this, no, 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 no. But it's just like, I can
Mhm.
do anything, and I've never been
Well,
told otherwise.
exactly. She feels like I can do anything because my mom says that I can, and my mom constantly affirms that and treats me like I'm smart and capable and independent. And I think that goes a long way because we see Elizabeth treat Mad with all of that value and affirmation and trust and confidence. And it's the same way that Elizabeth treats their dog 630, just
Yeah,
talking to the dog like a person and keeping track of like all the vocabulary and the tasks. And that dog ends up being like so smart and independent and capable in his own strange way. It's just the way that Elizabeth goes about her life, assuming the absolute best and brightest of everyone around her, like until proven otherwise, was a
yeah,
quality that I really, really liked about her character.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, like 630, the fact that he was like, I am a dog. I used to be known for being part of this bomb squad, but I knew where the bomb was and I ran the other direction because why would I want to go jump on top of a bomb? That's scary. I never go run away. So of course everyone thought I was bad at my job, but I'm actually really good at my job. I just also know where to go. And then he would keep track of the number of words that he had learned from Elizabeth, where he was just like, I know 691 words. It was like, I don't know how. It was so funny because there's a point where Mad whispers. I also love this moment where she whispers to the priest and she's like,
Oh
my
yeah.
dog knows 691 words. I'm like, first of all, how did he tell you that? I want to see that scene so badly. But I love that scene because it's like she whispers something and it's a secret, and he whispers something back, and she looks less impressed. And then later on in the story, you hear what that is, and it's like she whispers, "My dog knows 691 words," and surprise, he responded back with a secret of, "I don't believe in God." So it was like such an interesting dynamic to have all of these characters not solely be, antagonists or supporters of Elizabeth in her own goals, but to also kind of have their own doubts and, um, thoughts of their own life, then not just being challenged by Elizabeth, but sort of intersecting with her life and her children or her child's life, and seeing how different someone can be when they're treated with respect, and that really is all that anybody's looking for. And then to kind of form this strange found family amongst all these different characters who love each other, and all had kind of grown so close together that it's hard to imagine any of them kind of like jetting off and doing their own thing, but they were all really kind of a family together.
Yeah, I mean, and you see each of them kind of gain this new spark and confidence by the end of the book. And even though the women that watch Elizabeth's show, there's all of these fun little asides of these like women walking through the park and like exchanging chemistry jargon and like sharing notes and shopping lists, but it's all like written in like chemical breakdowns and lingo, which is like just goes to show again Elizabeth treating people as if they are smart and capable, without having to like pander to the plain Jane simple housewife. All she had to do was a few episodes of talking very seriously and plainly without holding hands. And of
And it
course,
was
they all
great
picked
because,
it up because they're all smart and capable.
yeah, and like even after the first episode, they were like, then the phone started ringing off the hook, and everyone's asking, so what is C3H12O5?
Yeah.
How do I buy that? Because I want to make that recipe. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not like, what, this is crazy, because they would always lie and say, like, you've had so many complaints. But
Mm-hmm.
there was a small percentage of complaints compared to the number of people who were like, this is incredible. I love this show. Because in afternoon television time slots for the time, it was that sleepy show that nobody cared to really pay any attention to. It was just stuff to turn your brain off during. And it's probably the time that the housewives were watching TV, or their children were watching TV. Who knows if their husbands were home yet? But it's really like the time for the housewives during the afternoon time slot, right before supper. And you cook alongside it, you do what she says, and you feel empowered at the end. And they had said, like, it's not just that Elizabeth Zott is teaching people how to cook, but she's teaching people how to be
Mm-hmm.
with this show. And I feel like if this had existed, if this was something you could watch, like, I would absolutely be a fan of this show. This sounds amazing.
Oh yeah.
um, and it would be super empowering because like literally every single magazine and article and advertisement to women was like slim yourself down, how to make him notice you, and how to, change your hair so that he pays attention, which was exactly what was it Harriet who had done it, or somebody who had done, I think it was Harriet who did it in the end, um, who said like she read all these magazines because she was so unhappy with her marriage, and when she had asked for forgiveness at the priest, they were like, well, divorce isn't possible, but here's what you can do: make yourself more attractive, try to make yourself smaller, make him love you again. So it's like,
Right.
oh,
Reflect on what
okay,
you have done. Yeah.
right, to make him upset or whatever. So she's like, oh, so I've read every magazine, so there's no one who's more of an expert than me in magazines. And I mean, when you see from that perspective that like women are just, yeah, I mean, God, like we've come so far that it feels like obviously this is what happened, but like I can't imagine being this way where it's just like every day that you go to a store, it's like you're probably going in there to buy some type of housewife type of tool or a magazine to teach you how to be a better housewife. And
Mm-hmm.
it's such a like, it's such horrible servitude to just like, I'm only going there to become a better servant for my husband, and it's just this endless cycle and around and around and around, and I produce more kids that are either going to be a husband or a housewife, and it's like one or the other, and it's,
Mm-hmm.
God, it's totally dystopian, it's totally horrible, but that's exactly the reality. And I also wanted to point out, just while we're talking about some things, that the dedication in this is to Bonnie Garmus's mom, and she says, for my mother, and she talked about in her interview that this was the reality of her mother's generation, and that she was thinking about how when her mother went to school and she really liked things like film and photography and stuff, then she was getting the notes back home that were like, oh, she's trying to play with the boys stuff, but obviously we know that women are not good at film and women are not good at, it's like, so like you think women can't hold the camera as good? Like, why, what are you talking about? But it's not something that was challenged back then. So she was like, yeah, I realized while writing this book how difficult it must have been for my mother to have faced this constant barrage of put downs, to be told that she couldn't do the things that she wanted to do. And I just had so much more, thought about that time while writing this book, and I felt so, um, grateful that she had gone through all this to give me a better life in the way that I have it now, but just so bad that she had to suffer through all of this. And I just found it, a good moment to just reflect back and think about her life and whatnot. And I think that that's just something that most readers will probably experience at some point reading this book, to think this is fiction, but it's not that fictional. The things
Yeah.
that are
No, I definitely
unbelievable
was thinking
are
about
not.
that.
Yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah.
it's not the progression that's so unbelievable. It's more that the dog can tell you how many words he knows. That it's so.
Yeah, like that was the fantastical part of the book. Totally. It's like the rest of it, oh, women were treated this way less than 50 years ago? Of course they were. Yikes.
Yeah. Also, even speaking about the dog in the interview, so I really wanted to bring this up because, of course, you have a dog named Sunday. So
Yes.
Bonnie Garmus has a dog who was named Friday,
What?
and Friday was the inspiration for 6:30.
Oh my
And
god.
she said that, well, at some point they had moved to Germany, I think, and they had like talked to the dog and tried to like teach the dog different words and stuff. And she had jokingly one day said in German something that was like the equivalent of like sit down. And I don't know if she like told it something else, but like the dog just like immediately sat and was like, "Do you know German?" And he just looked at her like, "Obviously, I know German."
Huh?
Obviously.
What?
So
I
she was just
love
like,
that
"Yeah,
so
dogs are
much.
smart." And I was like, "Is this science fiction? Wait, what?"
Dogs are
Um,
smart. That's so funny that you said that. We literally just were talking like this week about like, oh, maybe we'll get a cat. I don't know. What would we name a cat? And we were joking about like, well, we already have Sunday. We could do Tuesday or Friday. And I was like, what about like a month, like September or something? And then we are like, oh, maybe like a time, like 2 o'clock. And then it made me think of 6:30 in this book.
Oh my god. Yeah, I also loved that 6:30 was like, um, if like I had met her at 2:31, which is when I realized that she was the mother of whatever. So like that's what I would call her, because like he
Yeah,
he wouldn't call people by their names. He'd be like the creature 231. Like he would just like call them whatever time it was. It's like I love that because yeah, dogs should be able to name humans too. Why are we the only ones naming them? It's
yeah,
great.
I love that. I love the way that
Um,
6:30 was named, where it was like he just follows Elizabeth home, and Calvin is like, "Who's your friend?" And Elizabeth is too far away to like hear what she said, so she just says like, "Oh, it's 6:30," and they
and
just
the
like
dog was like,
ran
"That's
with
my
it.
name." Yeah.
I
The
loved
dog
it
and
so much.
Calvin were both like, "That makes sense to
Cool.
me."
Yeah. Maybe my rating is a 4. I don't know. The beginning was so boring to rate any higher. I love that we are
Changing
just
minds.
gushing enough to raise your rating. The characters were so great. I did hear this, and this makes me very excited because I
Yes.
think it would be a
Okay.
fantastic show.
So here's the thing I'm so excited about this with. So I again this was partially in the interview. So when this book was written, it was auctioned, and so many people were clamoring for this book. And Bonnie Garmus was like, "This is my first novel," and I'm like 60, I think. So she's like, "I've never written a book before, and I decided to write this because basically one day I had one of those days, and like every woman has had the experience of like men being terrible to them." And she was like, "There was
Uh-huh.
some guy who was like just saying all these things that made me really pissed off, and I went home and I wrote the first chapter of this book." And like she would have this whole writing process where she would, get through and write this book and write the drafts and whatever. And she eventually, tried to publish it, and her editor was helping her. And then all of these people were like, wow, this is a great story. I'm going to auction for publishing your book. So in the UK, all these people were clamoring for it. And I think, I don't know what her deal ended up being in the end, but I'm sure she got a significant amount. And then in the US, it was also being auctioned. And then her editor said something like, oh, yeah, it's being auctioned in Hollywood. And she was like, haha, that literally doesn't make any sense because how would they have read it to be able to turn it into a show? Like, what? That doesn't make whatever. And it's like she didn't believe it until she was like, so it was true, and they're turning it into an Apple TV show miniseries. And
Wow.
I love that the choice for Elizabeth Zott is Brie Larson because
Hmm.
she's a person that has so often been criticized for not smiling enough
Yes.
and for being like, oh, she's pretty, but she'd be prettier if she smiled, and like, oh yeah,
Yes.
she was pretty good as Captain Marvel, but I also have all these criticisms about her because blah blah blah, and like, and there's a million things that are sort of just like based on her looks, based on like, oh, I think she should have played the character like this or like that or whatever, and just constant criticism. So I don't have anything against Brie Larson. I think she's great. I don't think
No.
she's
Yeah.
like my favorite person ever because I don't know that much about her, but I definitely think she got a lot of shit that she didn't deserve, that she never deserved for just playing a role in one movie of the many movies that she's been in before, and that being what so many people know her for as like, she should have been. And I just feel like it's amazing that for a show of Supper at Six to be played by a woman who's hasn't smiled despite what people want her to do for this one particular movie role where she's playing a pretty serious character, to now be playing the person on Separate Six who doesn't smile, shouldn't smile, and stands in front of people and tells them how to prepare their meals for their families to nourish them, poison them, who knows, whatever the mood of the day is. It sounds awesome. It sounds great. I'm
Yeah.
excited.
I'm excited. I think Brie Larson is like the perfect casting. You're so right. Yep, perfect casting. Yep.
Yeah, I'm
Would
so
also
excited
totally
about it.
watch the show in the book. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about like, man, I really hope they turn this into a movie or that would be so good. And then I read the interview and was like, what? Oh my god, manifest it.
I love to learn when I consume media books or otherwise.
Yeah,
Agreed. And I did. There were so many like little juicy tidbits from just like life lessons or actual, chemistry lessons. I definitely felt like I ate my brain vegetables with this one. Still happens. I'm a big sports fan, and I have literally been quizzed by men to see if I'm a real fan. This doesn't happen to men. Oh my god,
oh,
yes.
you like sports? Name 5 sports.
Yeah.
It's like,
Name
uh,
all of them. What are the
oh my god.
sports? Oh God.
Oh God.
The interview was so amazing. Will you send me the link?
Yeah.
Because now I want to watch it.
It was part of the end of my audiobook, so I don't know if it'll just be included if you listen
Oh,
to
it must be like,
audio.
gotcha. I know. Okay. I will seek it out.
But yeah, it's probably elsewhere on the internet. And I think also something I really want to point out with the interview too is obviously like this book centers more so like the feminism that comes from a white woman standing in the middle of this field of male dominated industry and all these things happening, but she's still a white woman.
Mhm.
And Bonnie Garmus says several times without, pandering or anything, but just in a very frank way, a very genuine way that I really respected. Just she was like, well, this is speaking, this book is talking about the trials that people go through here, but it doesn't remotely even talk about, how much harder this would have been for a woman of color, and that there's so many people that are oppressed and not put into the positions that they should be put in because of the color of their skin and the idea that they belong into some particular gender role. And so this is so much harder also for women of color. And, she made a point of pointing that out and saying that also in today's world that that's something that, is much, much harder. And it's not like by writing this one book and talking about this one white woman's struggle that she's like, I solved feminism. But like, she very much was like, this is a story. And like, I have absolutely experienced a feeling of like, sexism and misogynism, but this doesn't even get into misogynoir. And I think that she kind of knew like, this is not really my story to tell. And I think it
Mhm.
would have been much more complicated and, a more tenuous story to have written from the perspective of a white author to talk about a non-white protagonist. So I kind of feel like with what she did, even though this, with like Storygraph, it's always like, was the cast diverse? Like, well, not racially, no.
Right.
But I also feel like with what was within Bonnie Garmus's bounds of like what would be comfortable to write about, she really did a great job by not, pandering at all inside of the book or outside of, in the interview or anything like that to the idea of like, oh, I have to include these characters and talk about their struggles as well, because I think that would have been a really separate story that maybe she would not have been as well equipped to talk about, because most of her experience writing this was from researching that time in the 60s. And it does feel a bit disingenuous to then, tell that story that doesn't quite belong,
Mhm.
like historically in that background. But I really do appreciate that, like, she still made those notes and talked about that and acknowledged that this was still, a factor that she was thinking about here.
Oh yeah, that is using her platform and privilege for greater good. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Brie Larson's comments on us needing more critics of color to speak on movies that represent them.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, exactly what happened with Captain Marvel. Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any final thoughts that we want to discuss before we
Okay,
wrap up our little discussion?
real quick, because we
Yes.
already talked about the spoiler. Did you see Calvin's death coming?
I kind of like right before it happened, because it was the classic, like they had like such a sweet moment like right before, and then like Elizabeth left early that day and I was like, oh no, oh no,
Yeah, like
this
just
like everything
something
is
about
going
like
way too perfectly.
like something about the tone changed where I was like, this is going too well, but also the sentences just got shorter, and I can tell like with the staccato of the flow of the sentences, it makes me feel
Yeah, there was just like a
like
sense of unease.
yeah, like it's like the uneasy feeling in your stomach that like something bad is about to happen, but I couldn't quite say what. And like
Mm.
it should be fine. Like she just bought something to make things more safe for 6:30. So and obviously it's a safety net. Things will be better. And then like no, like no.
uh,
Uh,
yeah,
man.
that was wild. The plot got better after he died. I was like, we could finally get to the story.
Oh God, Brooke.
Oh man. I mean,
Yeah.
like fair, because I was sold on the book being about this woman, this chemist who becomes the star host of a cooking show. and like the first chunk of the book was like very not that, and so I did feel a little bit of like, okay, when does the story start? But you got me. Like I was still very invested.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought he left her, not died. I was prepared to be mad, not crushed. Rachel's point about the writing is great. You almost read it faster, like you're running out of breath. Totally.
That's exactly how I felt, because I actually was reading it physically at this point, and I was like, oh no, oh no, oh no,
Yeah.
oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no, like just getting to the end of the page, like I fucking knew it. Where it's like he was dead 37 minutes later, like no, no, because it like sometimes when you're reading a book, you can tell like the author's about to do something, and you have to like just cover the last sentence because you're like, I know I'm about to read it by accident, and I don't want to do that to spoil myself. Man,
Yeah.
Bonnie, why'd you do that? So
Bonnie, how could you do this to me? How could you do this to me? Question mark.
Calvin didn't die for this.
I definitely had like that moment where you're reading and you just have to kind of like and just like think about it for a second, stare off into the distance.
Yep, like I couldn't even reread it a few times. I was just like, oh no, no.
Yeah. Ouch. Ouch.
And I mean, like it makes sense in a sense of like, you know, taken too soon, but like it's been a while since I've felt a character death in any way, and it obviously I think Calvin is not the most likable character. I was not by any means like crying or sobbing over his death, but it definitely did come out of nowhere where I was like, I don't really know what to expect from this book, but I thought he would live at least a little longer, a little bit, but I also really liked what happened with his gravestone, where all that stuff kind of like
that too.
spiraled out, and then it was like, first of all, like the gravestone got so messed up to begin with because it was like Calvin Evans, 1927 to 1955, brilliant chemist, rower, friend, lover. Your days are numbered. Like what the heck? Like he's already dead, so it sounds like it's a threat from beyond the grave to you, the person reading the your days are numbered. And she was like, no, it was supposed to say your days are numbered, use them to throw open the windows of your soul to the sun, which is really long. And it came out like, well, this is fucked, this is not how it's supposed to come out, and I'm grieving, so whatever. And they just sort of dealt with it, and then that groundskeeper with a gun ended up shooting the tombstone while aiming at 630. By the way, if 630 died, -1 star. Like, no.
Oh, I would have lost it.
I would have wept. No, it's not allowed.
I was really scared it was going to happen too, but I was very glad that it
did. There were a lot of times where I was just like, no. I feel the tone changing, and like you can kill pretty much anybody else. Not 630. Like it's not even like an animal death thing that gets me, but it's like specifically 630.
No, yeah. Anyone else?
No, I was very scared for a while, but with the tombstone, then it ends up being Calvin E, 1927 to 19. Okay, brilliant K, and then your days are new because the bird gets shot off. But your days are new, and she looks at it and is happy and just says, she remembers that when Calvin was once talking about his childhood mantra, he had said, every day is new. So your days are new was like a perfect, strange, fitting way for her to almost get a little bit of closure that like this sort of did something in a weird, fantastical, cosmic way that things coincidentally turned out that way. Right. And sometimes those kinds of like leaps of logic do happen in the story that I really liked. Like it wasn't like every single thing had to be perfectly explained in those senses, but some of them were almost like those leaps of faith. And when Mad says to the priest character, and she's like, oh, I'm doing this because I have faith. And he's like, well, how can you have faith if you don't believe in God? And she's like, well, faith, or like, she's like, I don't want to get my hopes up or whatever it is. And he's like, well, how can you get your hopes up if you don't have faith? And she's like, well, I do have faith in like, you know, things, you know, not necessarily in God, but I could still have faith in other things. So I think that whole conversation about also the unknown and the way that it's addressed both with science and with faith was such a cool conversation to also include here. And I mean, as I'm thinking about all the things we've discussed in this like hour and 20 minutes, I'm like, yeah, this was only a 386 page book.
I
And
know,
all
it's
that stuff was
crazy.
in
It's
there.
so good. Yeah.
So
Yeah, it really
it,
touched on a lot.
it was really great. I really liked it.
His death was so frank, fitting with the overall tone of the book.
Oof.
Yeah, it did really come out of nowhere. I liked how frank it was. Yes. It was
Yeah.
very no nonsense. Like I just felt like
Also like the way he died, I was like, how did he die from that? Because it seems like so. Let me try to walk through this. So he's walking 6:30 on a leash for the first time, and again, this is so funny that it's like nobody jogs outside. So they're like, this man in his underwear is running outside, and they're like, no, we get this complaint a lot. It's just Calvin Evans. This is great. But he's like jogging outside with 6:30, and I guess because they had often like gotten spooked before when one of the cars in the police precinct backfires, then 6:30 runs away, and normally he would just run, and then they would be able to follow him. But because Calvin has him on the leash, then they kind of like get turned around. I don't understand how Calvin died because to me it seems like if your dog ran the opposite direction, you get dragged along with them. So even if this car is like backing out towards you, I don't see how he was like caught in the middle of the crossfire of the car to be run over, because it was like he fell and then hit his head and fell unconscious, and then the car like crunched over him.
I imagined it as like they were approaching the driveway, car backfired, 6:30 ran across the driveway and like pulled Calvin into the driveway, and then that's where he like got squished.
But he definitely hit his head because the car, like the, not to get too gruesome on YouTube and get you demonetized, but I'm just saying the wheels went over like his
Yeah,
head.
yeah,
So like he was already on the ground, and it
right.
sounded
I
like
think it was
like
he
he
probably just
struck the
got yanked.
ground.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I was like, leashes can kill, because I know that like for the rest of the book, Elizabeth Dodd's like, it's my fault. I bought the leash, and I'm like, obviously it's not her fault. But I'm also like, I don't understand how he dies. I don't get how a leash kills. Leashes don't kill people. I don't. Elizabeth
no,
Dodd
well
kills
that
people.
was the
I
thing.
don't get it.
It wasn't the fault of the leash. It was just this wild freak accident, but she
Yeah,
blamed herself because of the leash. And like when we get 6:30's perspective, he like also feels guilty because of it too. So there's
yeah,
like this weird thing with the leash and guilt, but it wasn't, I don't think it was actually the leash, you know.
right. It's just it's this bizarre thing of like somehow because of that one thing being out of place, the way that both 6:30 and Calvin reacted was kind of opposite from how they should have because of that one
Yeah.
sound. And it's weird that such a horrible, gruesome Rube Goldberg kind of comes out of that, but it
Yeah.
can, happen. Um, yeah, it was crazy,
I know.
but
What a moment.
yeah, definitely very haunting though, because I was just like, don't understand, but I don't want to reread it because that's very gruesome.
Wow. Any final thoughts, comments, concerns, poetry?
Do you have a favorite part of the book?
Mm. There was like a lot of like great moments that I so enjoyed. Um, I liked all of the moments with Mad. I loved 6:30. I loved the relationship that Elizabeth had with Walter and her
Yeah.
constantly being like, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that. And Walter being like I'm the TV expert, like you just please, can you just, you have to, can you just do it? And her being like, no. I loved when she gave away all of the decorations from the
I
set.
was gonna say I loved that part.
Yeah.
I love that. I think maybe my favorite is partially like included with that with the woman who was like, I want to be an open heart surgeon and everything. And afterwards, like when she gives her all those, parts of encouragement, she's like, oh, you've won our free giveaway thing of the day. So you get to take home this, like, I
Yeah.
forget what it was, but like spinach pot roast thing. And like, congratulations that you won this thing. And we'll be back. Like, I don't know. It flowed so seamlessly from like a moment of like, what's going to happen to like, hey, here's this dream I have, which is totally unachievable. Well, you can achieve it. Here's some empowerment and some food, and we'll be back after this short commercial. Like, what? It's great.
Oh, you know, one of my favorite parts was where she goes to see her gynecologist, and he's like, "Oh, like, didn't you row with us? Like, there's like
Oh
a rower's
yeah.
bond." And she goes, "Yeah, but like that was just because of Calvin, but I still have like the erg, like I've been erging at home." And he's like, "Why would you do? How often and why? And like how
Oh my
far do
god,
you
yeah.
go?"
And she's like a
Oh,
million
every
miles
day for
away.
this ridiculously long amount of time, and he's like, "What? Why
And
would
he's
you?"
like, aren't you currently pregnant? And
Yeah.
she's like, yeah. Of
Yeah,
course.
that was great. And then like inviting her to be back like on the team rowing with them, I thought was really precious.
Yeah, and I think it was really cool also, like, Bonnie Garmus is also a rower, so
Hmm.
all that stuff she was like, "This was the one thing I didn't have to research because I actually knew all of it," and, like, the fact that, Elizabeth said something after being asked a question on the thing where she was like, "Oh, I row," well, someone was like, "How do I, like, eat all this food, but I also wanna be on a diet and not gain weight, and, like, I wanna exercise, but, like, I don't like to exercise, so, like, what do I do?" And she's like, "Oh, why don't you row? Because I wouldn't eat any of that diet crap, eat like good food for you, and then exercise like this because this is a high intensity activity. It'll burn the fat that you're looking to get off of your body, but it's also healthy for you. It improves your circulation, it improves your lung capacity, and all that stuff." And then everybody in the whole world signed up for rowing the next day. And like when she went to, I think it was like at her gyno slash
Yeah,
rowing instructor guy's thing, like she went there and he was like, what did you do? Why is everybody here? Like everybody is here and
including
they
like
all,
his wife.
yeah, he's like, I've
Yeah.
never been able to get my wife to ever come and row with me, no matter how I, and then today she comes and she's like, oh, so I think what you mean to say is thank you, and he's like, no, like this is so great.
I loved it.
God,
I also loved the journalist who like hears her whole life story and then
yeah,
writes that beautiful piece on her life, which gets like so twisted and ends up being this like horrible
sensationalized
part of
piece,
the book, but then
yeah.
it circles back around and later becomes published properly.
Oh,
But the
and
moment where she keeps
also,
making people coffee, even though people are
mhm.
like, no, no, I really don't. It's okay, I don't
And
need
she uses
coffee,
all
and then
these
they
like
take a
Bunsen
sip of
burners and
her like
stuff.
magical chemistry coffee, and they're like, what is
They're like,
this?
this is coffee? This is coffee? Wow, this is so
Uh,
good. And they're like, I don't drink coffee. And they're like, well, maybe I will drink coffee
mhm.
after all this. Also, I love the moment where Harriet, with the magazines and stuff, is like, there's the person who like published all the things and was like, I'm sorry about everything that happened. I've been trying to publish in all these scientific journals, but nobody's listening. And she
Right.
like takes his work and is like, I'll ask for forgiveness later because it's exactly what every man in the book has been doing to Elizabeth,
Uh-huh.
where it's like, I'll just take her work and then we'll see what happens. Or she's just like, my turn, and she just takes their work and publishes it through the
Sends it to
magazine.
Vogue.
And like she's like, oh, after 2 weeks it was like, I don't know if it worked. And then after 4 weeks it's like the crushing rejection. But then it's sort of implied that like her husband just hates her so much that he just threw out her mail and has no idea the significance of it at all. And then shortly after is when you see like women and the work they do and why it matters on Vogue, where it's like, exactly. Like it's really the appeal in the more unorthodox ways to teach science outside of scientific journals because the general public doesn't read that, but the
Hmm.
impact comes from those popularized pop magazines. That's where all that stuff reaches its audience and has
Right.
the impact the same way that Separate Six did. So
Yeah.
it's just a very cool, like kind of almost full circle moment of like any woman can kind of find a way to make an impact, even in the ways that are most often still treated with disdain for being part of a female gender role. Like, if women exist inside that gender role, you still should give them the respect that they're owed, and they can still be empowered to do things that are still treated as traditionally feminine, regardless of, if that's something that you want to do or not. It's still a well respected thing to do. And I liked that was still, the theme through it that I kind of feel like was hammered home with that moment in the end.
Yes.
to some degree, to still kind of bring it all back to Elizabeth and her message for the people.
Yes. Love it.
Oh, also, before we end, sorry, we have to talk about the ending, right?
Oh yeah. I don't. What are we doing? I'm
I know. We're like, bye
scared.
everybody. This is like this insane ending. My God.
Did you see any of it coming?
Um, I think I started to see it coming because when I saw like these people showed up and it was this like mysterious donor that was like, hey, please come back to the lab and we'll talk about whatever. And then you see that there's a guy and there's a woman there. I was like, oh my God, obviously Bonnie Garmus. Why would I ever assume that the donor was a man? Because
Literally, exactly. Yeah, but it got me too. It got me too.
and like in that moment I was like, oh, okay, so the donor was a woman, okay. And then shortly after, when they were talking about like, oh, he's in this well-dressed suit, and then also she's in this well-dressed suit, but she has this little daisy, and I was like, well, obviously that has to mean something, but the book's almost over, so what could it be? Gotta bring it back. But I was listening to audio, so I didn't have as much time to be like, let's think on this one. So it kind of just sort of happened alongside the story. So for me, did not fully predict that, but it definitely made sense as we were getting there. And I was kind of on board of like, oh God, it's yet another tragedy of people who you thought you could trust throughout the whole book who are like, we just want Calvin's work from his boxes. And I was like, no, 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 no. But it ended up being a much more wholesome thing.
Yeah, I thought that like Calvin, it was gonna be like his father, right? But then
Yeah,
classic Bonnie Garmus checking my biases to be like, psych, it was his mother the whole time, but she can't be independent because it's the '60s and she needs a man for her to write her own checks.
right.
That reveal was like, wow, I should have maybe looked at that a little bit closer, but I liked it a lot. Even the fact that where Elizabeth is like, so are you guys like together? And the
And she's
donor,
like,
his
no.
mother is like, no, he works for me. Like, what? What
Yeah,
are you talking about?
this is my lawyer. Like, please.
Yeah.
Also, okay, that was a great moment near the end where fucking Donatello, what the hell's his name? Not the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. That's Donati. Donati. It's like,
Oh,
you're
she
like,
gets to
what's going
fire
on
him.
here? Oh God, it's so great. Like when he comes in and he's just like, oh, if I knew you were coming, they were like, yeah, well, we kind of meant to surprise you, and by surprise you, I mean do all of this when you weren't here because we basically didn't want to include you. And they're like kind of polite while also dissing him. And then they're like, well, we want to basically replace the head of chemistry. And he's like, but I'm the head of chemistry. And they're like, well, maybe we'll leave it in the hands of someone more capable. And Elizabeth just like leans in and is like, you're just not smart enough.
Yeah.
Bye. It's like, oh, great. Perfect.
Yeah. So good.
Screaming. So good. Um,
6:30 moment.
iconic. Very iconic.
The guy knows so good.
Really was.
I saw it coming, but wasn't sure exactly how. Loved how it turned out. Wish they would have had a little more time in the book together at the end with Mad. Yes, I wanted the whole. I needed like some kind of an epilogue, you know?
Yeah, it was really surprising. They were like, well, I do have to leave tomorrow to leave to a different country. I was like, well, wait a second. You want to meet Matt?
Yeah.
Like now? Like what? But, they were like, yes, we'll have to get together with the whole family. I was like, oh, family.
I
Okay.
know. I did. I thought it was a great ending. Actually, no complaints.
But that was great. I mean, like they really, Bonnie definitely made sure that every single little thread that she had just like very carefully left um, askew throughout the story was eventually wrapped up together, because there was a moment pretty early on where I was like, okay, I could probably put the book down soon. And it was like, Calvin would never forget what he had learned about his father. And I was like, well, what did he learn about his dad? What? I gotta keep going. Like, come on.
Yeah.
But I love that was, it ended up that way, that again, Bonnie doesn't hold your hand the whole way there, but there's obviously the implication that, Calvin had suspected that his father really was still alive from seeing the guy outside who seemed to be the donor giving the stuff, and then he abandoned him there, supposedly. And then there were just all of these like horrible misunderstandings because the stupid bishop being like, "Your son died,"
Yeah.
that like he just has this assumption of like, "Wow, I hate my dad," and then that still comes back like it's one of those such a small world moments because then the priest was his pen pal who was like, "I wish my father was dead," and he was like, "Ooh, Calvin clearly went too far in this letter," but meanwhile the priest was like, "I definitely asked something and it was way too personal and I can't figure out how to write back," and then he died, so then I officiated his funeral, but I didn't know what to say, and I was gonna talk to his wife slash girlfriend, and she just left before I finished. I don't know what to do, and then I accidentally met her child, like two roommates, the most unlikely couple. Where it's like, yeah, like it's the weirdest like full circle thing, but it was very cool and strangely believable that it all came back together in that way.
Yeah, I liked all the twists and turns.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. Well, thank you for enthusiastically discussing with me. This was a blast. I'm so glad that we read and fully unpacked everything.
I'm so glad I finally finished the book for once before the show. So thank you
I
for
know.
having me
Yay. You deserve
again.
a cookie. Gold star for Rachel.
Oh, thank you. Despite my poor track record in the past, thank you for inviting me back. This is a super great book, and I'm really glad you picked it. So it was
Yeah,
really
I
perfect
love
for us.
it. It's like definitely on my reread stack to get to eventually.
Yeah, a very good one.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Thank you for everyone who joined us. Yay, Rachel, for finishing. Exactly. Exactly. Claps
Oh
all
God.
around for Rachel.
Oh, thank
Um,
you.
yeah, let us know when you finish the wild ones. We'll have to do a little encore.
Encore.
Oh, God.
Oh
Well,
man.
thanks for a great discussion. You are welcome. We will see you next month in a few weeks for When Women Were Dragons is next.
So
That's
excited
a
about
reading
that.
with Andy, and I'm freaking stoked. I think that's what I'm picking up next. So
Oh, so
I
hyped.
keep looking at it on my like TBR shelf, like, ooh, I just want to read it.
One of these
Perfect for
days.
Pride. Sapphic dragons, love it.
Literally perfect. Literally
What's
perfect.
better than this? You're welcome.
Um,
All right. I will see you hot dogs around the internet.